Hey, everybody. This is your daily dose of all things royal. Hey there, my gorgeous, good looking friends. I have gone down the rabbit hole this morning, and the level of deceit is astounding with Meghan and Harry. If you've been following me for a while, you'll remember that I have called out Archewell public charity for possible fraud and dishonest business practice. And although I sound like a broken record, I need to remind everybody that Archewell is not classified by the IRS as a foundation. It is actually classified by the IRS as a public charity. And with that status, they are mandated to be transparent with the public in disclosing where the donations that they're getting from the public are going. So far to date, they've yet to disclose any of that information. In theory, the public can ask Archewell for this information, and should they fail to produce it, that's grounds to report them to the IRS. Putting that aside, Archewell continues to mislead the public, claiming they are a foundation in order to avoid disclosing their unethical, shady business practices, in my humble opinion. So I saw a post on Reddit today that had me looking further into it and starting to connect more of the dots surrounding the situation with Archewell. Let me bring to your attention a nonprofit organization called Silicon Valley Community Foundation. On the surface, Silicon Valley Community Foundation, or SVCF, portrays itself as an advocate for equitable policy reforms and sustainable income strategies for low-income people and communities of color. Now, while all of this sounds like they are for the ethnic minorities and really bridging that inequality gap, this too is a facade that is masking what this really is: a brokerage house for the wealthy to park money and receive immediate tax benefits. That's what's going on here. So, a little bit about SVCF. For those that don't know, it has been riddled with scandal, employee abuse, and misappropriation of funds. So it should come as no surprise that the brokerage house gave Archewell Public Charity $10 million in 2021 in the form of a donor-advised fund. Before I talk through my theory about what is going on, let me give you a quick crash course about these donor-advised funds, aka DAFs. So, what is a donor-advised fund? It's a philanthropic giving vehicle administered by a charitable sponsor. A donor-advised fund allows donors to establish and fund the account by making irrevocable tax-deductible contributions to the charitable sponsor. Donors retain advisory privileges and may recommend grants from those funds to other charitable organizations. In other words, you set up a DAF in much the same way you do any investment account, and then fund it with money you've earmarked for charity. So taking it a step further, the DAF can be seen a little bit more than just an investment account or savings account. It also acts like a miniature nonprofit foundation. Rather than setting up the account at a traditional broker house, you establish it with a nonprofit sponsoring organization offering DAF services, which in case is this Silicon Valley Community Foundation. The honest way that this is supposed to work is, in theory, you as the individual or organization donates to the actual DAF. And then you, as the donor, advise the sponsor on when and where to distribute this money. Thus the name, the Donor Advised Fund. Now here's the caveat. Once you put money into a DAF, it no longer belongs to you as the individual. You've just made a charitable contribution to the nonprofit sponsor. I hope you're following where I'm going with this. Now pay attention to what I say here now. So once you put this money in the DAF, it's you and only you that get to make the grant recommendations on how this money is allocated to this charity that you are passing this money over to. Until then, until you do that step, the money actually still sits in that brokerage account, DAF, where it can earn interest or market returns. In the case of Silicon Valley Community Foundation, this is not very transparent. The donors aren't actually required to spend very much of what they put into the funds, and that a lot of the funds that are distributed aren't spent locally or going to the designated charities that actually need the help. The problem with this setup is that there's no time frame on when the money has to be allocated to the designated charity. And this is why we need regulations around this, because what is happening is people are parking this money and letting it sit there as it accrues interest. It can also be assigned and passed down to multiple generations. So, majority of these cases, the money is actually not reaching these charities that really need it. So, when you look at the 2019 tax W-2 for this organization, and that's the most updated one that they have, you can see that the majority of their business is holding in these donor advised funds, which, as you can see, aggregate is about $8 billion sitting, collecting interest. The key takeaway is understanding what the immediate tax benefits are. And as you can see, is 60% of your gross income. So now let's come back to the DAF that was given to Archewell in 2021. I know what you all are thinking, probably saying, who in the hell gave Archewell $10 million? At first, you're thinking to yourself, this is alarming that there are people who are giving free money away to this grifter. But I have a theory. You see, with these DAFs, once they're allocated, it's allocated anonymously. So the public never knows who is giving the actual money. Remember, these DAFs act sort of like a foundation in which they're not required to disclose this information to the public. You see, this could be anybody. But when we think about Harry and Meghan, they ultimately like to have control. So while I think that it is possible there is a rich backer for these two, it's more plausible, in my opinion, that this DAF came from themselves. Let me explain. The first indicator for me is looking at the cause area as to where this donor advised fund has to be applied to, and it says general nonprofit support. So when we talk about general nonprofit support, we're looking at staff costs, we're looking at expenses, the private jets, the clothing, the marketing, the PR, all those things that go nowhere near any charity that they allegedly are supporting. We know this because we see when they give their donations, it's always in food or things that can be itemized, as well as when they do mention a charity, they always say that they're partnering with. They never say that they have given any type of amount of money for specific programs. So that's my first immediate glare and red flag of saying, no. This is kind of odd that somebody's going to give $10 million to just go pay for Meghan's clothing allowance. No. This leads me to believe that Harry's book advance of $20 million allegedly, which I don't think it was that much, I think it was more like this $10 million, was put into a DAF in order for it to not have to pay taxes on it. And by having that in the DAF, they can also control it by allocating money to Archewell. You following me? There's a reason why they set up all these different shell corporations. So knowing that the advance for the book probably went under Pekka Publishing, which is their entity that they're using to put the Penguin House money there, I believe that that money then was then transferred over into a DAF, and then now they're using the money from Archewell and not having to pay the taxes on it. The messed up thing about this is that it's perfectly legal because of the lack of regulation surrounding it. This is why so many rich people don't want this investigated, don't want to regulate these DAFs, because this is how they are avoiding paying their fair share of taxes. What's really disturbing is that it feels like it's another BLM situation where money is being taken and not actually getting to the people. As you can see, and I just did a quick search at the very beginning and looking at the various charities of which funds are being allocated to, if you notice that African Leadership Foundation and African Women's Development Fund, this is eye-opening to me. For general nonprofit support, one is getting 50 million, another is getting 15 million. Not to mention that the African Women's Development Fund is in Ghana. How much of that money is actually getting to the people who are in need? I wonder. This doesn't seem right at all, but it's perfectly legit and legal. you have to be suspicious about this because clearly, look at the donation for Archewell. It says 10 million sitting there. But then you have other not-for-profits who have lower amounts of money, which you can actually believe that people have been donating to that. And as you can see, that for the purpose of itself, it's not going to general nonprofit support. It's actually going to the cause and helping the actual people in the charity. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the whole Silicon Valley Community Foundation is a sham, but being that it has been riddled with scandal and have been called out for misappropriating funds, it's very possible that somewhere in that $8 billion that's sitting with them in this brokerage, aka place to park my money so it doesn't get taxed, it's not just something Harry and Meghan would do. Apparently, this happens all the time, and how the rich are getting richer off of it. What's even more frustrating is that they're using the minority angle and trying to exploit and profit off of it, which is even more upsetting and disgusting when you look at how this is all set up. Now, this is my humble opinion. The deceit of this couple is a lot deeper than we realize, and based off of the observation and behavior, as well as the dishonesty so far we've seen with Meghan and Harry, it appears to me that Archewell is nothing more than a Ponzi scheme, in which taking people's money, instead of showing them a return on investment with money, they're trading that in impact. However they're measuring it, to me, it's all bullshit. Right now, this stuff really needs to bubble up to the mainstream media. Maybe not in the US, but definitely in the UK. I know that they're more open to finding whatever they can to, show people what frauds these two are. Here in the United States, I think the frustrating thing that I'm seeing on television is when UK news is reporting the sentiment that they're getting from the US is that the US is gravitating and feeling more sorry for Meghan and Harry. I think it's a bit frustrating that the smaller channels and the smaller voices are not being heard. So please, I ask you, share this video so hopefully it'll bubble up to the mainstream media and that somebody does open Pandora's box to blow the lid off of this, because Harry and Meghan are taking people's money and using it for their own purposes. So please share so this bubbles up. But that's all I have for you today. Tomorrow I'll be back with some more content. And until then, be safe and I will catch you later. Bye.
It was such a fraud.